Yeah, here we go now, baby. Right back into the action for another day of the week. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Before You Bet. Aaron live right here on the Coverage YouTube and X channels. If you're watching on YouTube, smash that like and that subscribe button right down there. So a pretty light night here as far as sports betting goes for games you can bet on tonight because the NBA is off. There are a couple college bowl games. Brad Powers and I covered those on Monday's show. If you missed that, you can go back and watch that. But there is still a lot to talk about in the world of sports, specifically the National Football League. And these first-round playoff bowl games get underway. We'll be breaking those down with John Middlekauff here in a matter of seconds. If you guys want to participate in the show today, very easy to do so. Hit up that live chat on YouTube, on X. Let us know what you like in the NFL this week. What do you like for these first-round college football playoff games? And can you believe it? Christmas is a week from today. I still got to do my holiday liquor run here. I look forward to doing that every year. Okay, let's talk a little football. Let's go to our guy down there in Arizona, former scout for the Philadelphia Eagles, John Middlekauff. John, do you have all your Christmas shopping done yet? Or are you one of these guys who's scrambling at the mall on Christmas Eve?
Yeah, I mean, that's where the internet has come into play. I do. I think after I talk to you, I might go on a little run to try to get a couple little things for some little kids. But yeah, I am a last minute guy for sure. I do think Amazon and the internet has changed things a little bit, but it is still, I'm a procrastinator by nature for basically 99% of things I do in my life.
So I was thinking of this morning. Now, my wife and I have an arrangement where we don't exchange gifts on
Same.
Christmas. I highly recommend that to anyone out there. It makes Christmas much easier. What do you think the hit rate is on gifts that you get, whether it be for your birthday or for Christmas as an adult, that you're like, this is awesome? I was thinking 6 out of 10 probably.
Yeah, it's got to be pretty low. I would say most gifts, the older you get, some sentimental value behind it, some sort of value of like something you didn't think of. I would say most like material things, I think have little value the older you get. Like, it's why Christmas, you get kids, you get nephews and nieces. Like it is a little kid's holiday.
It is.
And I think I tell everyone in my life, do not get me anything. I do not want anything. And not just because I don't want to not reciprocate. It's just like, I don't want the pressure. Like, don't worry about me. Like, I'm fine. Just let me watch the game and have a cocktail in the middle of the day on Saturday. And I will provide some stuff.
Yeah, that's all I want too. Okay, so let's get into a little football. Big news yesterday, this quarterback saga for the Atlanta Falcons that began in the offseason. They gave Kirk Cousins a boatload of money, surprised everybody, drafted Michael Penix early in the first round. So this has finally come to a head. Kirk Cousins out, Penix is in. Do you think Penix gives them a better shot at getting into the playoffs? They're still very much alive, a very easy schedule in front of them. They play the Giants this week. Then they have a head-to-head with the Commanders, who are directly in front of them in the playoff race. And then they finish the season against, I believe it is, the Panthers. So what do you think of Penix getting a shot here?
Well, I still think Washington is just one win away to get to 10. So they're in pretty good shape, even if they were to lose that game. I also think when you look at Tampa Bay, this is their toughest game coming up this weekend, and it's Cooper Rush. Now, Dallas has been dramatically better with a pass rusher, but you watch – and listen, I had the sound on and the big TV on the other game because Minnesota was the only relevant team of the 4. Like, I'm sorry, I don't take Atlanta seriously. I never have. I was wrong on one of my big bets before the season, picking the Saints to win the division. Turns out I'm pretty sure it's going to be the Bucs. I shorted the Falcons, though. I didn't believe in it from the beginning, and it's honestly worse than I thought. And Cousins in that game, he looks shot. I mean, we make fun of Rodgers for being washed or shot, but it's relative to his ability. He's still not bad, right? He just nowhere near the guy that we saw that was like, I mean, once one of the more talented players we've ever seen. And that's what happens when you're 40 years old. Cousins can't move, never could, but now he really can't. And now I don't know the biomechanics between an Achilles, your lower legs, and your arm, but they're clearly all tied to each other. And unless you have like a Mahomes, Josh Allen, Elway, Aaron Rodgers in his prime arm, most pocket quarterbacks that are bad athletes, their feet have to be set. And this goes to the great ones like Peyton Manning or Drew Brees or Phillip Rivers. And you see the ball coming out of his hands. One, he just has lost his confidence. And two, the arm. I mean, if I like to use the baseball analogy just because we don't really talk about it's hard to quantify how hard a guy throws in football. But to me, the baseball analogy, this was a guy who I would say in the peak of his powers threw 93, 94 mile an hour fastball, but he threw a lot of strikes. And now he throws, 86, and he's getting shelled. And this also gets back to they gave him, I guess truly $90 million guaranteed. But it was, he's benched before Christmas. And you go, well, they've drafted a quarterback too. Well, this guy was pro ready. What they should have done, look at Minnesota. They say, Cousins, we're out of your business. They did the exact same thing, draft a quarterback. What did they do? They paid a guy $10 million. Now, Darnold has, been one of the stories of the year. But even if Darnold had been Cousins, they still 1 year, $10 million. This team, and all the talk now about could they trade him? He makes $27.5 million. And at this point in time, look at bridge quarterbacks like Minshew, what he was supposed to be, but what he was last year as a backup for Anthony Richardson, what Darnold is. That market is not $27 million, especially for a guy 37 years old who can't move and whose arm's going the other way. I think they're screwed, man. Now, if they ate a bunch of money, could they get his number down to $10 million, so eat 17 and trade him for a 6th-round pick? Yeah, maybe, but that's even more of a disaster, isn't it?
So let's look at it from this scenario. What happens if Penix comes out and he just sucks, which is a possibility? He's never taken a snap in
for sure
in the NFL. So you got to think heads are going to fly in Atlanta if that's the scenario, right? Because this might be just an incredible botch with the money to Cousins and then using the 1st-round pick on him.
Yeah, I'm pro Michael Penix. I like the player, but it's very difficult situation to get thrown into. 3 games left. Everyone in that building, coach and executive, has to be miserable and on edge right now. Players are kind of miserable because they're playing. I know they won, but is that one of the worst wins of the year against the Raiders? Holding on for dear life against the guy that ruined your season last year, Desmond Ridder, who's driving him right down the field. I'm with you. I think you can't convince me if they lose 2 of 3, even if Penix goes on to become a good player, but just throw some picks, just struggles, which it's the NFL. Look at Caleb Williams, greatest prospect ever, is terrible right now. So could everyone get fired? Because let's face it, they were pretty haphazard in the way they needed a quarterback. Totally understand. They put all their chips in the middle. Giving Cousins that much money off a torn Achilles is pretty bold, right? Baker Mayfield had just led the Bucs and resurrected the franchise post Brady. It was okay, we'll give you $100 million. You're signing a guy that's not your guy, who's injured, who couldn't practice. And then clearly once the signing happens, there's that period between free agency and the draft. They get to know Penix. They fall in love. And it's well, you probably should have known that. Haven't you been scouting this guy for 6 months? And shouldn't you have been in the Gardner Minshew, Sam Darnold category if you were going to draft a guy 8? Because it's not that they shouldn't have signed a quarterback, right?
Yeah.
But you could have just, instead of giving him 90, give Darnold 1 year, $20 million.
Yeah.
So did you see if they trade him, which I don't think it, do you think anyone's trading for $27.5 million? Seems like a lot.
You'd need him to be your starter. I don't think that a lot of teams would be eager to bring Kirk Cousins on as their starter, right?
No, and the bridge market is, way less than that. And obviously the backup market is, 5 to 8 million is a lot for a backup. You can get backups for 2 or 3 million. That they have, then they get 30. That's if they could trade him, not cut him. The dead cap, that just means wasted money, is well over $30 million. Part of drafting a rookie quarterback, part of Minnesota, where I do give them credit, they got a bunch of flexibility, is if they do go with JJ, they have the 5th or 6th most cap space. The Bears having Caleb Williams, you don't want to have this other quarterback. What is going now? If Cousins had already been there and they would have been in the situation, understandable. But they actively chose this. And I know they benched him last night. Let's face it, he's been pretty atrocious now for a month plus, really, really bad. Like that was, I mean, he made some of those throws in that game were some of his better throws of the last, I would say, 40 plus days.
Yeah, it's been ugly. Speaking of kind of ugly, I guess, let's talk Detroit Lions. This is a very easy team to get behind, a lot of fun personalities. They score a lot of points. They're running all the trick plays. We know that the history of the franchise, but these injuries are getting ridiculous. They're really starting to pile up. It sucks that David Montgomery is out. Despite this, though, they're still near the top of the Super Bowl futures odds board. Do you think all these injuries are going to be too much for them to overcome here?
Well, to me, I just don't think you can lose that many defensive players. Montgomery's not a killer. One, he's a really good player, but it's an easier position to replace with a practice squad guy with a backup. You already have an excellent running back, which is basically, I technically he's the 2, but I view like 1A and 1B. I don't think you can overcome corner after corner, linebacker after linebacker, defensive lineman after defensive lineman. And let's face it, they still played Minnesota the last game of the season, who's also dealing with some injury stuff. But even that 49er game at San Francisco, missing this many defensive linemen with the 49ers, like you are playing Kyle Shanahan. And I know that they have been up and down and a lot of down relative to what they've been. But that is, they would die to have, instead of being the Niners, like it'd be the Titans or the Jags or just some random team. Or the Giants or just some crappy team in the NFC. That's kind of a sneaky tough draw for a team that I would think is going to fight pretty hard toward the end, because it's not like the 49ers are like, well, we'll just tank the season and get the 6th pick. I mean, they have been a disaster and they're drafting 15 right now. So my guess, because so many teams are so awful in the league, I would expect the 49ers the next couple of weeks. They play your squad this week, Miami. I think they're going to play pretty hard down the stretch, so that, Kyle has because if you had the worst season ever and you're like, well, we ended up going 9-8 or 8-9. It shows you how high their bar is. And you just saw in that game against, you got people quit. The entire team turned on Campbell. Right. So I think they're going to battle. That's a tough spot for Detroit because there's no plug and play. Where do you find these defensive linemen? What do you do? Offensively, I think they'll be fine, but defensively, I mean, they haven't been able to stop anybody. I mean, once Jordan Love settled down the second half, it was like touchdown. Obviously, the Bills, touchdowns, unlimited. I think the 49ers could have elements of that. Who they played, the Bears, they get a little lucky there. But
yeah, good bounce back.
Beside the Bears games, those last 2 games, depending on who's up, you could easily lose both those games. You know what's crazy is all of a sudden it's like, are they battling for the 5th seed, against the Packers, assuming the Packers went out? And you're like, what the hell happened?
Yeah. Yeah, so they're trending in the wrong direction here a little bit, but 2 teams that are absolutely trending in the right direction. Absolute buzzsaws right now. The Bills are favored to win the AFC. The Eagles are favored to win the NFC at a lot of sports books. Still tied with the Lions here. Some spots, but I think if you ask a lot of people who you pick in the meet in the Super Bowl, a lot of people would say Bills, Eagles. So I'm going to put you on the spot. If those 2 teams were to meet on a neutral field, who are you taking?
I would give a slight edge to Philly because I think their defense is better and they just have more high-end guys on defense. But I do think the Bills are more likely to win the AFC than the Eagles are more likely to win the NFC because I do think the depth of teams in the NFC is just going to be hard. Now, if you get the 1 seed, which the Bills might not, I guess we'll see what happens with Mahomes over these next 5 or 6 days if he plays both games, if they give him a game off. But I think if Josh Allen's on, I think they win the AFC. I mean, the Eagles could have to play the Rams, the Packers. Minnesota losing their left tackle, it's a pretty big blow, but they've been playing without him for a while now. But you saw on Monday night, you lose another tackle, all of a sudden it's like, ugh. And the talent they have on defense isn't quite to Philly or even Green Bay's level. I think Green Bay is a pretty big curveball. Obviously, they played the Eagles week 1, kind of a sluggish, weird game for them. Jordan Love got injured. But I think you've seen kind of down the stretch that Green Bay's high end is pretty high. Now, the Rams are a team everyone likes, but we did just see the Rams play the Eagles. It might just be a bad matchup for them. But I think Green Bay is a team definitely to be reckoned with, because the other thing is, for Green Bay, when Jordan Love's on, he's just a much better passer of the football, I think, than Hurts. And I know Hurts is pumping his chest out after one big game. But for the most part, like, they've been struggling to throw for 150 yards. I don't know what they are now, but they were like last in the league or near the bottom of the league in pass attempts. So it's like, and listen, the Pittsburgh just did everything to stop the run, and then those guys were wide open. If those guys are going to be wide open against anybody, they're going to, the Eagles will win the Super Bowl if you don't cover AJ. If AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, if you tell me before a game, combined for 20 catches and over 200 yards, and they both score a touchdown, I will be like, lock Eagles win, right?
Yeah, the NFC is going to be fun. Tampa Bay, maybe some upset potential there as well. They're a fun team. Okay, so we're going to get into some best bets here soon. Going to touch on some college, but one last thing to throw at you. So you touched on Caleb Williams. He is struggling. He did look really bad on Monday night, just way off with some of these throws. So if you're drafting today, what order do Williams, Daniels, and May go in?
When you asked me this question, you sent me the email. It took me probably less than 5 seconds to answer this question. And listen, this is based on what we've seen. That has to factor in, because you can't be like, well, you're changing your tune now. I think most people's decision would have Caleb last. I really do, because a huge part of Caleb and Drake May is like potential, right? But with Drake, I still see a guy that's not terrified run around constantly. I mean, Caleb Williams, and listen, Minnesota was a tough matchup, but looks completely lost. I think everyone would say Jaden number one. And I think you have to wonder, if you had beers and a cocktail with Ryan Poles, if he could do it over, would he have taken Jaden number one? And personally, if it's about upside and traits, because if you're defending Caleb Williams right now, like, well, I still love the traits. Well, I just take the bigger, stronger guy and Drake May, because I'm watching Caleb, who just looks like Sam Darnold year 2 on the Jets. I'm seeing ghosts. He just sits there, doesn't see anything, and then scrambles around. I mean, it's awful quarterback play. Now, you can blame the organization, you can blame whatever, but he did some of that in college as well. So to me, it's Jaden 1, it's Drake May 2, and Caleb Williams 3. Now, again, like, a lot of people are critical of stuff like this. It's like, I'd still take the guy in the top 5, but what we see right now is pretty scary, because one thing that it took Sam Darnold 7 years of rehab. Like, when you don't see it and you hold on to the ball, listen, you lose your confidence, some of the touch on the deep ball. I'll give him, but there is just like, he sees stuff and he just freezes.
Yeah, it's not pretty. I think Drake May, that's a guy you got to give a lot of credit to. Most casual fans, I said this on the show yesterday, can you even name the second best receiver on the New England Patriots? Probably not. His coaching hasn't been that good either. So
it's been worse. And like you said, his skill guys, because at the end of the day, Caleb still has DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze run around out there.
Yeah.
Think about that. How many playoff teams, what would the Chiefs do to just be like, hey, would you trade your receivers for those 3? How long would it take Andy Reid to be like, trade, right? I mean, it's like they're wide open. And that's the thing with Caleb Williams. Like, every other play, it's like, God, this guy was wide open. And it's not one of those, like, very in-depth football. Well, that's a 7th read. It's like, no, the guy's right over the middle. Caleb's looking right at him, and he won't pull the trigger.
Yeah, one really bad one to Keenan Allen stood out to me there on Monday Night Football, and some of the body language stuff from Williams on the bench too, not serving him well. Okay,
do you think the Bears, if they could redo it today on December 18th, would still take him number 1 over Jaden Daniels?
No, I mean, there's some football IQ stuff. The guy's been in the room now for how many months for them, and they got to, they've seen it and lived it for, this many months now, this many games. And you've seen some flashes. Absolutely. Yeah. The potential's still there, but there's some red flags there as well. Absolutely. Okay, let's get into best bets here. We got 3 for the NFL. We got 2 for college football. And then I'm going to get your pick for the national championship winner in college football. So let's start on Saturday. This line has been flip-flopping due to the status of Patrick Mahomes. Now it appears as if he is going to play. He practiced in full there yesterday. So Texans now a 3-point dog. You like a lot of underdogs this week. You like the Texans to cover that number.
Well, two things. And if you practice in full, which is essentially Tuesday, so usually his day off, that's a pretty good sign, given that he played Sunday. But he legitimately hurt his ankle. Now, we've seen him bounce back very quickly before. The one thing the Texans do really well, and the Chiefs have really struggled, is their tackle play has been pretty atrocious. And listen, it's not from lack of effort of drafting guys. It just hasn't worked out. And one thing the Texans do really well, like their offense has not been that good this season. Statistically, when you watch the eye test, it's just been off. Their defense is really good. And they already have 2 double-digit sack pass rushers, edge guys. So if Mahomes is going to be compromised movement-wise, I just think it's a pretty good matchup right there to get pressure on the guy. And I also think that the Chiefs just, even when he's healthy, playing a lot of tight games. So you're getting me short week against a really good defense. It feels like a low-scoring game again. I do wonder, and listen, this is not the NBA where Mahomes would probably miss the next 2 months, and half of those would just be load managed. So when you can play, you can play. Andy said it yesterday. If he can play, he's going to be on the field. But I do wonder if it's even like 50-50. Just give Wentz, and then you start him Wednesday against the Steelers. Because basically you win one of these next 2 games, right? You're going to get the 1 seed. And maybe they look at it, it's more likely to win the game at home, with this, 6 days rest instead of 4 days rest on the road, which, if you think the Texans have a good pass rush, you could argue the Steelers, if TJ's healthy, have even more because they got more bodies. But I don't you agree both those 2 teams over the next 7-8 days? I mean, they have a lot of pass rush, and that has been a problem for the Chiefs on the outside. And it's an outside pass rush, right? Like edge pressures.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the Chiefs are losing one of these 2 games. I don't know which, but and you're just going to give me, what's the Steelers line, you think, assuming Mahomes plays? Like, pick them?
Is it in Pittsburgh?
It's in Pittsburgh, yeah.
Yeah, I would say, because the low-scoring nature of the Chiefs games here lately, I think that would make sense. Maybe a point either way.
Maybe Chiefs +1 or -1 or something like that, assuming they win this game. But both these games, like, even if they win them both, they're not going to win either game by 10+ points. That's not how they play. I mean, every game's kind of the same.
Yeah, and we expect them to go just 1 loss all season. Someone's going to catch them here at some point. A lot of teams almost have plenty of times. Okay, so another game here on Saturday, and it drives me nuts that both of these games are during the day on Saturday. You can't put one of them in primetime NFL. Steelers are a 6-point dog taking on the Ravens here, and once again, you like the underdog.
You know what really drives me nuts, and I'm trying not to be negative because we still got football left. And I get they had to do it because Christmas on Wednesday.
Yeah.
This would have been a great game if you look at the slate for Sunday morning. But because they basically, all 4 of these teams are just switching opponents come Wednesday. Yeah. I don't think the NFL necessarily wanted to like step on college's toes, but they didn't have a choice with the way the schedule set up. But I would love this game just to be, the slate Sunday morning is not great. This is just an auto. Whoever's a big underdog in this game, home or away, especially when it's Tomlin. I think I saw that, the Steelers have kind of owned this matchup lately. Yeah. Now, I was pacing around on Sunday right before the afternoon games, and I was tempted. I'm like, I kind of like the Steelers' momentum coming into this game. I was like, you can get them at like money line was like +210. I'm like, I might place one of my largest bets of the season. I kind of got cold feet, and I'm glad I did because about 5 minutes into that game, you're like, ugh. Rough matchup. Obviously, Pickens missing games is a problem for them because once they've inserted Russell, he has been such a huge addition. At first it just felt like he was 50-50 the first game you missed. Now you miss a couple games. Maybe it's a little more serious. TJ Watt's foot, but this rivalry game, Steelers kind of, this is a huge game, right? Once you lose the Eagles and Baltimore beats the Giants, all of a sudden they're right back on your heels. So I would expect to get I don't know what was going on with the Steelers DBs last weekend. Because one thing, listen, A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith are going to make plays on you. It felt like they were wide open. It's like, guys, one play, it's like, are you not going to cover A.J. Brown? Like, what are we doing here? and a little bit like the Ravens. Like, are you guys going to cover these guys? So I would expect a much more spirited effort in a weird way, because obviously the Eagles are, if not the best team, one of the best teams in the league. With this Ravens game looming over it and knowing that you got a Wednesday game, did they just kind of, in a weird way, look past that game, which maybe normally they wouldn't have if it was a regular schedule? I don't know. That's how I have to justify it if I'm going to hammer the Steelers in this spot.
8 straight unders between the Steelers and the Ravens, by the way. Probably not much of a shock.
Well, Lamar hasn't been very good against them.
No, and he wasn't when they played earlier in the season either. Okay, so this next one, you're going to get no pushback from me whatsoever. I am a Miami Dolphins fan. When the Miami Dolphins are playing a team that has the ability, at least, to be slightly above average, they basically got no shot. Now, the 49ers are in town. The Dolphins are a small favorite somehow, favored by a point, I believe, and you like the 49ers to take care of business here.
Yeah, I'm just betting on this team fighting down the stretch. And this is a matchup of, one thing the 49ers are, and you saw that Rams game in the rain, which pretty embarrassing for us West Coast people. It rains a little bit, and neither team can move the ball. You put like the Steelers against the Bengals just in a rainstorm, it's probably like 18-17 going into halftime. But I just think, the Dolphins won. I mean, Tua, what was that last weekend? Like, what an atrocious performance by the guy. He looked terrible. There's a lack of toughness with this franchise that we know about. And the one thing the 49ers is they are tough. The other thing they have is they have a lot of good DBs. So, Charvarius Ward's back now. Lenore, Greenlaw looks like he's going to play. So you got Greenlaw and Fred Warner. I just think that defensively they match up pretty well. And I just wonder how close the Dolphins are to doing a 1-2-3 Cancun, and just, McDaniel is not exactly Bill Parcells or Bill Belichick where he's just where he's just going to drive you till the end. Like, are they just kind of mentally checking out now that their season's over? I would say the same thing about Indy. It's like once your season kind of ends and you had pretty high aspirations, especially a team like Miami that was dead, and then they kind of had some life, and then to lose that game. Yeah, I mean, I it wouldn't shock me if the 49ers win this game by like a little like the Bears, after just an awful loss, all of a sudden you come back and, they're up like 17-3 at halftime or something, and they've picked off Tua for a pick 6 and he's just unraveling.
Would you be surprised if Mike McDaniel gets fired here? Because if the narrative continues, they lose to the 49ers, for example, and then they have 2 outdoor games to close out the season in New York against the Jets and against the Cleveland Browns. What happens if they lose to the 49ers and then the narrative continues? They get their ass kicked up in the snow against the Browns or the Jets because they fired Brian Flores coming off of a couple of winning seasons. Now, everyone thought he was an asshole, apparently, and that had a lot to do with it as well. But the team wasn't bad under Flores. Do you think McDaniel could get the axe here?
Yeah, I mean, to me, you can never say never with some of these, like Miami, Cleveland, even when you go, yeah, people think he's a bright offensive mind. I think there is a major question mark. Like, say what you want about Stefanski, this year's he loses quarterback. They value defense as a coaching staff and the way he hires Jim Schwartz. You look at Mike McDaniel, you're like, well, I know on a whiteboard, you give him a black Sharpie, he could design some sweet plays. And if his quarterback can execute them, they'll look cool. But the team will crumble under pressure. And defensively, it feels like he has no impact, right? Like he doesn't know anything about defense. He's had how many defensive coordinators now in 3 straight years? And it feels like, are they going to have to hire another guy? And yeah, I mean, to me, I wouldn't want Mike McDaniel as my head coach. I think he is best suited to be like number 2 or number 3 on your coaching staff. I think if he's your head coach, you got major problems. I also don't think they would fire him, and just go on like a coaching search because they fired him, but they also fired the GM. So are they starting from scratch? It would be like if you tell me Black Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday of that week that Mike McDaniel's fired, I'd be like, I bet Stephen Ross already has does he already contacted Vrabel? Would he be willing to pay the $10 million, buyout for Belichick? Belichick, there were some interesting jobs that quote unquote might come open.
Yeah.
That I just think he couldn't wait. But like the $10 million buyout, these college coaches, like 3-4 years into their college careers, their buyouts are still like $30-40 million. So that's what's $10 million to like Stephen Ross? I'm not saying he'd want Bill, but maybe he would. And if he did, like $10 million is he probably has his couch cushions.
Yeah, I think they'd go big coach hunting if they did make Key and him. They've been linked to, they were linked to Sean Payton, of course. Ross,
Tom Brady forever. Like they go big game hunting.
Harbaugh too. He was trying to get him forever. That was the rumor because Ross is a Michigan man, but of course that didn't work out. Okay, let's talk a little college football here. Then we will let you get on your way. First round of college football playoff gets going here on Friday night. You like a couple dogs in the Saturday games. You like Clemson here plus 12 to give Texas a game.
That seems like a lot of points. I mean, if you told me what was the biggest spread before right when the games were announced, I would have probably said, either Indiana at Notre Dame or SMU at Penn State. For this to be the biggest spread seems crazy to me. I mean, they have an NFL prospect at quarterback in Klubnik. They have a coach who's won multiple national championships. They've been to the playoffs a million times. Hell, they just had a spot where they had to win in a big game against a team that was ranked in the top 10. And for most of that game, they were up pretty big. So the other thing is, every time I looked at Texas as the season went on, after I went to the game against when they blew out Oklahoma, it's like, this team's pretty good. And then the rest of the season, you turn on the game, it's like, God, they're struggling to beat Vanderbilt. God, they're up a touchdown against Arkansas. It's not like this team has just been destroying people on a weekly basis, and they just lost. They have a serious flaw at quarterback right now because Quinn Ewers isn't playing that well. I think 12 points to me, that feels like 6 or 7 way too many points. I mean, it really does. Some of the other games, when you look at like Notre Dame and Ohio State, it's going to be like NFL playoffs. It's going to be freezing cold. College for the most part, maybe one game in early November is cold, but not mid-November. I mean, you're talking 20 degrees. In Notre Dame and Ohio State. So, no, Ohio State, in theory, likes to pass the ball. They got a 17, 18-year-old kid that might be a first-round pick right now. Probably would be. They have other sweet wide receivers. Well, it's like you watch the Chiefs and the Packers and some of these teams. When you're playing like the teens, you usually aren't throwing for that many yards. So it comes down to running the ball, playing defense. Honestly, I like Notre Dame a lot. Like they're built for playoff football. Run the ball, dominate on D. And I could see them just smothering Indiana 24-7 or something. But it's just, God, that game was not close. And that's on the flip side, Ohio State. I mean, Tennessee, they have an NFL defensive line. So, I mean, sweet. We were just talking about with the Chiefs. You're like, that matchup against the Texans and the Pittsburgh Steelers these next 6-7 days is going to be tough. Well, no, Ohio State, they're missing their tackle, who's been hurt forever. Their center before the Michigan game tore his Achilles. It's like if you're playing NFL defensive linemen and in the transfer portal era, you don't go too deep with NFL players anymore because that backup that was like a 5th-round pick transfers to like Minnesota or whatever.
Okay, so speaking of that game, Ohio State playing host to Tennessee here. And once again, the theme continues. You're going to go with Tennessee 7.5-point underdog in this one.
I'm riding dogs. I like the dogs. I love Clemson plus 12. I just think that's too many points. And same thing here. This number seems high to me. And this is not, some of your Southern teams, like if this was Miami at Ohio State, it'd be a little like, your NFL team. Be like, well, it's 80 degrees there. It's hard. Knoxville, like Tennessee is not, I would say, North Carolina or North Carolina's cold, but like some areas in Georgia, Florida, it's cold. So these guys are used to the cold. Now, maybe not 20 degrees, but they've been practicing outside in cold weather. And their style of play, defense running the ball translates. So, if Tennessee could get anything out of the quarterback, I think they would be a little bit of a sleeper. Definitely the following week, if they win this game, they could 100% beat Oregon. I mean, they're going to be a tough out.
Okay, John, let's end with this. Who's winning the whole damn thing, and who are they beating in the national championship game?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably the safest thing would be to go like Oregon, Georgia. But I think Penn State's a little bit of a sleeper here. They have NFL players everywhere. They go too deep at running back. 10 and 13 are really good players. Watch them against Oregon. Their quarterback, who's coming back, I think is a pretty intriguing NFL prospect. They have the top tight end in the country. Now, the problem with Penn State is their coach, who loses a lot of big games. But look at their path. If they beat SMU at home, which I expect them to do, then they get Boise State, who's a good team, but it's the Mountain West. And then they might be playing Georgia, who, college football, they don't have to announce injuries like the NFL, and stories don't break, Adam Schefter. It's like, is Carson Beck out for the season? Did he just get the Purdy injury? Because if he did, and Gunnar Stockton was interesting in the game against Texas in the SEC championship game, but it's still their backup quarterback. There's a reason he doesn't start. So it's crazy to say, but I would go value on Penn State, which, but because I think Oregon, for as awesome as their season, whoever they have to play, Ohio State or Tennessee, I mean, they might not even make it out of one game. They could play well and lose.
Yeah, they got burned.
They got screwed.
Absolutely. No doubt about that. Okay, John, we will leave it at that for today, though. But, of course, you will be with us next week for the Before You Bet Christmas Day betting special. So we'll have you on to preview these NFL Christmas Day and Boxing Day games. So until then, best of luck with your bets, and we'll catch you next week.
See you, my man.
Yes, sir. Man, right there. Always a lot to talk to John Middlekauff about. Great addition to the show this year. Okay, so that pretty much does it for the show today. This might be the first time in the history of Before You Bet where we don't have picks for games taking place tonight. I suppose we could have done a little hockey or something like that, but we usually don't cover much NHL. But like I did say, we got some bowl games going on tonight. Brad Powers was on the show on Monday. He broke those down and gave out some best bets, so you can go back and check that out if you're itching for some betting action here. But if you are really itching for some betting action, you should tune into the show tomorrow, because we're going to be right back firing Thursday Night Football. Jake Butt will be here to dive into these first-round college football playoff games. And then I think like every team in the NBA is playing here tomorrow night. So it's going to be an absolutely loaded show. So you're going to want to tune in to check that out. All right. Thank you to John Middlekauff for joining today. Thank you to producer Mick and producer Chris for helping out behind the scenes here today. Big shout out to our sponsor, BetMGM. Make sure you check them out for all your sports betting needs. Thank you to all of the great viewers for tuning in. Guys, we will catch you again tomorrow. If you are betting tonight, best of luck. Woo!